Okay, so you want to own a nightclub, a dark room, a line stretching down the block, bass rattling the windows, and a bar pouring $20 drinks that cost $2 to make. On the surface, it looks absurd. People pay to walk in, pay again to drink. They pay more to skip the line and pay the most for a table that mostly exists for show. Judge the business purely by the markup on a bottle, and it looks like easy money. Here's the catch. A nightclub isn't really selling alcohol. It's selling status, density, and the feeling that tonight matters more in this room than anywhere else in the city. That makes it a far more fragile product than most first-time owners expect. The instant the room feels even slightly less full or slightly less exclusive, the economics start shifting. Rent doesn't care that the room feels quieter than it used to. Neither does payroll, and insurance certainly doesn't. But the crowd notices immediately, and money tends to follow the crowd. It looks like a simple bar with extreme markups on every drink. In reality, it behaves like a weekly referendum on your room's worth. Every Friday and Saturday, the city votes on whether it's still worth overpaying for. When the city says yes, the cash flow can look almost unreal on paper. When the answer turns into maybe, the slide downward starts fast, faster than most owners are prepared to handle. So let's start with the real question underneath all of this. What are you actually purchasing when you buy a nightclub? Most assume it's a loud bar with better lighting and a bigger sound system. That's not really what it is at its financial core. It's a short-burst, high-intensity cash engine built around crowd psychology. It packs a fixed space to the legal limit and monetizes pure instinct. The urge to skip a line, to be noticed by strangers, to stand near the center of the room. In an ordinary bar, people are mostly paying for the drink itself. In a nightclub, they're paying for where they're standing when they drink it. That single distinction explains why nightclub numbers look unbelievable. A cocktail that runs $10 or $12 at a corner bar becomes $20 here, and customers actually expect it. A bottle of vodka worth $30 or $40 wholesale sells for $600, sometimes over $1,000, at a well-placed table. In the biggest markets, premium table packages climb into the tens of thousands. From the outside, it looks like the closest thing hospitality has to a printing press. The real story starts well before opening night, and almost nothing here is cheap. The first major cost is location, and a nightclub cannot hide somewhere affordable. It needs to sit where nightlife already thrives, in entertainment districts, downtown cores, or tourist strips, where rent is already steep before alcohol enters the picture. Once a landlord hears the word nightclub, the terms usually get tougher fast. Nightclubs bring noise complaints, late-night damage, police visits, and genuine insurance headaches. So landlords demand larger deposits, stronger personal guarantees, and tighter lease clauses. You're not just renting square footage, you're paying for permission to create controlled chaos on someone else's property. Then comes the build-out, and this is where reality hits first-time owners hardest. A nightclub needs heavy electrical infrastructure for lighting, sound, and refrigeration, wired throughout the entire space. It needs industrial HVAC, strong enough to cool a packed, moving crowd for hours, and reinforced restrooms built for sudden surges of guests. Security cameras, marked exits, fire suppression, heavy acoustic treatment, staging, and VIP booths all add up fast. Mid-size clubs can easily spend $1 to $3 million reaching opening night. Top-tier markets push that figure much higher. In a famous Las Vegas nightclub, reportedly cost around $100 million to build because the room itself is part of the product. Expensive rooms signal expensive nights, and that signal is what justifies the prices. Then there's licensing, which sounds like a formality but decides everything. A nightclub without a liquor license simply isn't a nightclub at all. In many cities, that license isn't a simple form. It's a political process involving zoning boards, police review, and public scrutiny. In some cities, the number of available licenses is capped entirely by law, meaning you aren't applying for one, you're buying access to one that already exists. That access alone can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars before a single drink has ever been poured. By the time the grand opening arrives, months have passed, and you may already be several million dollars deep into a project earning nothing. Only now do we reach the part everyone imagines first, how a nightclub actually generates revenue once the doors open. The first stream is the cover charge, the cleanest money in the whole business, landing before the guest has consumed anything. If 700 people each pay $30 at the door, that's $21,000 before the bar pours a single drink. But cover is also one of the most fragile revenue lines in the entire model, since it depends entirely on perceived demand that night. The hottest clubs can raise cover and still pull a line down the block. Weak clubs end up waiving cover just to avoid looking empty. The second stream is the bar, where most outsiders assume the real money lives. To be fair, the raw margins on spirits genuinely are large, and beer, mixers, and simple cocktails all carry aggressive markups. But the margin on paper is never the margin you actually see in reality. Bartenders overpour, staff hand out free drinks to friends, and inventory gets mishandled or walked straight out the door. Busy, dark, chaotic environments create leakage almost by default, which is exactly why a club can look like it's printing money while quietly bleeding profit behind the bar. The third stream is bottle service, and this is genuinely unusual in hospitality, one of the clearest examples anywhere of paying for symbolism. The alcohol itself matters far less than where the bottle gets placed, how visible the purchase looks, and how elevated the buyer feels above the crowd. A nightclub essentially slices its floor plan into layers of pure status, selling each layer at a different price depending purely on visibility. General admission buys access. The bar buys convenience. VIP buys separation. Premium VIP buys total visibility. The most expensive tables are rarely the most comfortable ones. They're simply the tables everyone else can see most easily. A group of 10 might spend $3, $5, even $10,000 in one small section of the floor, not because they're drinking that much. They're buying the social theater surrounding the alcohol, the sparklers, the bottle parade, and the attention of everyone watching. For many successful clubs, a small slice of the floor plan drives most of the revenue because the room is monetized by hierarchy, not square footage. There's a fourth layer too, one outsiders often overlook: sponsorships and brand partnerships that quietly add serious money yearly. Liquor companies pay for placement, energy drink brands sponsor events, and fashion labels host after-parties. On top of that, venues monetize private buyouts, celebrity appearances, holiday packages, and festival after-parties, some of which dwarf a normal Saturday. So far, the nightclub sounds like an extraordinary revenue machine. Cover, bar, tables, sponsorships, and events stacked into a few compressed hours a week. Now here's the other side of the ledger that nobody shows you up front. It starts with labor because a nightclub needs staff working at real speed in the dark, with almost no room for mistakes. Bartenders need to move fast without losing control of inventory. Barbacks keep product flowing through a crowded, chaotic space. Hosts manage seating and VIP arrivals. Security controls entry, defuses conflict, and watches intoxication levels, handling emergencies the moment they develop. Add managers, cleaners, lighting operators, sound technicians, servers, and outside promoters, and the payroll list grows long before doors even open. Payroll isn't spread evenly across the week. It concentrates into a handful of critical nights that carry the whole month. In nightlife, labor isn't just a cost line, it's part of the actual product being sold at the door. A slow bar means guests buy less. A chaotic door makes the line look disorganized instead of exclusive. Sloppy bottle service means high-paying guests quietly stop coming back. The choreography costs real money every single week the club stays open. Then there's talent, because music isn't a background item here, it's often one of the venue's main pricing tools. A house DJ keeps costs manageable, but may not drive much extra demand. A major touring DJ can cost tens of thousands for one evening. That can work, but a packed room with expensive talent can be far less profitable than a smaller room filled with the right crowd at lower cost. Then there are promoters, one of the least stable parts of the business, functioning as outsourced demand generators for weekly traffic. Sometimes they're paid flat fees, sometimes commissions tied to table or bar spend, but the principle stays the same either way. A meaningful share of your crowd may not truly belong to you. It belongs to a promoter who can redirect that crowd elsewhere next month if a competing venue offers a better deal. That traffic can shift startlingly fast, sometimes within a single season, which is exactly why some clubs look stable right up until they suddenly aren't. Then there's the problem of comps, which sounds minor until you realize how much of nightlife depends on giving things away free. Free entry for attractive guests, free tables for celebrities, free drinks and guest lists, meant to make the room look hotter than it is. Comps create a dangerous illusion. A packed room can quietly contain guests who contributed no real revenue. They're purely to signal desirability to paying spenders nearby. This is the deeper point most outsiders miss. Occupancy is never the same thing as profitability in this industry. A nightclub can look completely full and still badly underperform if too much of the room is there on discount or barely spending at all. Too many low-spend guests dilute the room's energy and revenue. Too few guests make it feel empty and over-curated instead. The owner is solving a shifting social equation every single night, one that never behaves quite the same way twice. Here's where the business becomes far more fragile than it first appears. Unlike a bank or a shopping mall, a nightclub's core product isn't physical, it's relevance. The same room with the same bar and the same license can vary wildly in outcome, depending purely on whether the city still cares. A nightclub is one of the rare businesses selling the presence of others. The customer is largely paying for other customers standing in the room. That makes demand fundamentally reflexive. People show up because other people are already showing up. High spenders buy tables because the room already looks desirable, and the room looks desirable because enough energetic people are already inside. If one piece of that chain weakens, the rest often weakens right alongside it, which is why nightclub decline can feel sudden, even with months of warning. The line outside gets a little shorter than usual. The club leans harder on guest lists to avoid looking thin. Table minimums get quietly softened. Promoters start asking for better deals because the room isn't selling itself. The music still plays and the bar still pours through all of this, but the invisible pricing power that justified absurd markups starts eroding quietly beneath every receipt printed that night. Once that pricing power erodes, the business reveals how expensive it always was, because every fixed burden is still sitting there unchanged. Rent, insurance, security, and labor never disappear on their own. Debt service, utilities, licensing fees, and marketing costs all remain. In fact, some of those costs actually rise as the room declines, since owners spend more trying to force demand back artificially. More on talent, more on promoters, more on comps and cosmetic upgrades, all just to defend a revenue level the market has already stopped supporting. This is exactly where a lot of nightclub owners get trapped, mistaking a fundamental relevance problem for a simple marketing problem. Let's put some rough numbers on that to make the point concrete. Imagine a club doing $12 million a year in total revenue, roughly $4 million from tables, $4.5 million from the bar, and the rest from cover, events, and brand deals. The venue clears an 18% operating margin during a strong year. That's a genuinely healthy nightclub by any reasonable standard. Now imagine revenue falls 20% to $9.6 million because a competing venue opens nearby and your VIP demand quietly softens. Costs don't fall 20% alongside that drop. Rent stays fixed, insurance stays fixed, and most of payroll is semi-fixed at best. A healthy profit margin can collapse into break-even or worse almost overnight because a modest drop in perceived relevance produces a disproportionate loss. Nightlife carries another hidden pressure most new owners never expect: ongoing physical maintenance on the space itself. Intoxicated crowds are genuinely hard on buildings. Floors get scratched, upholstery gets torn, and fixtures loosen quickly night after night. In most businesses, cosmetic wear doesn't matter much. In nightlife, cosmetic wear reads directly as market wear to every visitor. The city doesn't interpret a tired booth or a dated entrance as a capex problem. It interprets it as the club falling off. That's why many venues end up in a constant reinvestment cycle: new signage, new layout, new booths and lighting, a refreshed identity every few years. The cruel part is a club often needs major money exactly when cash flow weakens the most. There's also legal risk, and this is where the glamour disappears fast. Intoxicated guests fight, fall, and sometimes drive home when they shouldn't. In many jurisdictions, if an intoxicated guest leaves and causes serious harm, the club can face a lawsuit worth far more than it ever earned from them. Add underage risk, fake identification, noise complaints, overcrowding violations, and periodic police scrutiny, and it's obvious why nightlife insurance runs so expensive. A single serious incident can become a lawsuit, a licensing crisis, and a public relations disaster within the same difficult week. Remember that if you ever think a long line means a safe business, the line tells you people want in and nothing more than that. It says nothing about whether the economics underneath are healthy or whether the owner is one bad weekend away from real trouble. A famous historical example of this exact disconnect comes from New York. A legendary club opened there in the late 1970s and became instantly world famous. The line outside became part of the mythology surrounding the venue. Celebrities, models, musicians, and financiers all wanted in that first year. By the end of that year, reports suggested millions in generated revenue. From the outside, it looked completely untouchable and endlessly profitable. But beneath the glamour, the operation was far less secure than believed. Federal investigators eventually raided the club without much warning. Tax charges followed, and its founders ultimately pleaded guilty to evasion, ending the story far less glamorously than it began. The crowd was real, the demand was real, the line outside was completely real, but the business structure underneath it all was far more fragile than believed. That story reveals something people routinely misunderstand about nightlife. Popularity and durability are simply not the same thing in this industry. A club can be famous and still be poorly structured underneath, packed nightly and still dangerously overexposed to one bad week. That legendary club didn't fail because people stopped wanting to party. It failed because nightclubs are exposed to far more than raw demand alone. They're exposed to everything involved in managing dense, intoxicated crowds inside expensive spaces under constant public and regulatory scrutiny. Modern nightlife carries the exact same lesson today. In Las Vegas, Miami, London, and Dubai, clubs get renovated, rebranded, or replaced after only a few years. That's not because owners got bored of running something successful. It's because the product ages culturally far faster than it ages physically. A room that felt elite in year 1 can feel completely familiar by year 4, and familiarity is dangerous when your business charges for urgency. This is why sophisticated nightclub operators rarely think like small owners running a single room with no backup plan. They think more like portfolio managers of attention across multiple cities, operating several venues specifically because diversification matters here. One independent club in one market is a concentrated bet on local taste, local regulation, local promoters, and local competition. A portfolio can survive real weakness in one venue through strength elsewhere, and vendor terms, talent relationships, and marketing efficiency all improve with scale. Scale doesn't remove the core structural problem, but it does spread the risk across enough rooms to survive one bad season. Even then, the risk stays real because the room creates false confidence in anyone standing inside it during a genuinely great packed night. Watching bottle parades run through a packed floor under bright lights makes it psychologically difficult to believe the business might be weak. It feels alive, it feels monetized, it feels genuinely important that night, and that feeling is exactly why some owners stay in far too long. They trust the energy in the room more than the numbers in the spreadsheet. Energy alone never pays a quarterly tax bill when it finally comes due. It doesn't service outstanding debt, cover rising insurance premiums, or pay for replacing a failing cooling system in the middle of July. There's another trap too, timing across the calendar year. Nightclubs don't earn money evenly across the week like most businesses. They earn it in short, concentrated bursts, Friday, Saturday, maybe one strong weekday, plus a handful of major holiday and festival nights that can outperform an entire normal month. A meaningful share of annual profit concentrates into very few nights, making the business vulnerable in a way most others simply aren't. Lose the big nights, and you lose a huge slice of the year's earnings, with no simple, reliable way to make that revenue back later. Seasonality makes this worse. Tourist markets rise and fall with travel patterns, college markets with the academic calendar, coastal markets with the weather. A few genuinely weak months can matter enormously given the high cost base and the revenue concentrated into so few nights each month. Economic downturns hit nightclubs in a specific way too. The room can still look busy in a weaker economy without actually being healthy underneath. Sometimes the first thing to quietly disappear isn't attendance. It's premium spend per guest at every table on the floor. A customer who once bought a $5,000 table buys a smaller one. A group that once ordered 3 bottles now orders just 1. The room stays loud and the lights keep flashing, but the underlying economics are quietly weakening beneath the surface in ways that don't show up until the monthly numbers arrive. Then came the period when nightlife lost its one essential ingredient: dense, shared, late-night physical presence packed into a single room. Nightclubs were among the very first businesses forced to shut their doors, and among the last permitted to fully reopen. Revenue didn't slowly decline during that period, it dropped straight to zero almost overnight, while the structure underneath remained completely unchanged. Rent still existed, insurance still existed, and debt still existed regardless. Some venues survived because they had real reserves or a landlord willing to negotiate honestly. A great many others simply didn't survive that period at all. The underlying fragility wasn't new, it was just impossible to ignore any longer. So does owning a nightclub actually work as a real business? In the optimistic version, where everything goes to plan? Yes. If you secure the right location, control your build-out costs, get the licensing right the first time, and design the room intelligently. If you manage the crowd mix well enough that high spenders want to be there, keep inventory tight, and avoid any major incidents along the way. If you maintain strong promoter and talent relationships without total dependence on any single one of them controlling your weekend traffic entirely. In that world, the margins genuinely can look extraordinary compared to an ordinary restaurant or bar running the same square footage. In the pessimistic version, you overpay to build the space from the start and open into an already crowded market with too much competition nearby. You lean too heavily on discounts to manufacture early buzz, depend too much on outside promoters, and underestimate insurance and labor costs from the beginning. You assume the room stays hot far longer than it realistically will. Then a newer club opens nearby, or the economy softens unexpectedly. Or one ugly incident damages your reputation, or your best spenders quietly migrate somewhere that feels fresher instead. Now you're defending yesterday's cost structure with today's weaker attention, and that's exactly when the glamour disappears and the math finally takes over. Here's the honest truth underneath the entire business model. A nightclub isn't really a bar, and it isn't really a music venue either, whatever the sign outside says. It's a machine for converting social urgency into high-margin purchases across a few compressed hours at a time, week after week, for as long as it lasts. When that urgency is genuinely real, the economics can look unbelievable. When it fades, that same room becomes some of the most expensive empty space in the entire city. So if you ever seriously consider owning a nightclub, understand this first. You're not buying liquor inventory, speakers, or a lighting rig. You're not even buying nightlife in any abstract, sentimental sense. You're buying a temporary claim on relevance in a competitive market, where relevance decays quickly while every underlying cost stays real. When it works, everybody notices the spending happening around them. What they rarely notice is how much depends on a social illusion holding. And that's exactly why nightclub ownership remains one of the strangest businesses in all of hospitality, where margins can look insane and cash moves fast. The room can feel completely invincible on a great Saturday night, but underneath it all, the entire model rests on one unstable assumption: that enough people will keep believing, week after week, without fail, that tonight matters most inside your doors, and nowhere else in the city. The moment that belief quietly weakens, the music may still be playing, and the lights may still be flashing, the bottles may still arrive cold. But the economics have already started turning against you by then, well before anyone standing on the dance floor even notices anything changed.